Good evening, you're watching OneVoice, brought to you by Asia One. I'm Kerry Alexandra. Tonight, continuing our look at the current conflict in the Middle East, we're moving away from looking at the governments, power games and geopolitics and focusing instead on the direct impact it's having on the people whose lives it's turned upside down. Because as the conflict between Washington, Tel Aviv and Tehran drags on, the headlines frequently focus on governments' regional strategies, the global economic impact, and even the history and context of the conflict, but not the current very real human cost of their wargaming, maybe because that cost is being paid overwhelmingly by civilians in Iran. Airstrikes, targeted operations, infrastructure hits, things often described in clinical, strategic, military terms. But behind every target, there are neighbourhoods, schools, hospitals, families, and lives that are permanently altered in a million different ways. The US and Israeli governments argue that their actions are necessary to counter threats, to prevent escalation, and to maintain regional stability. But critics say something very different. They argue this is just another chapter in a long history of military interventions, where the stated goals rarely match the reality on the ground, where there's misinformation and mission creep. Because none of this is new. We've seen this pattern before in Iraq after the 2003 invasion, after critical infrastructure collapsed, electricity grids failed, water systems deteriorated, hospitals struggled without power, medical supplies or enough staff, and civilians paid the price. In Afghanistan, 2 decades of war left millions displaced and a country still grappling with huge instability now. And now, again in Iran, there are growing concerns that history is repeating itself. Reports by journalists and humanitarian organisations point to damage not just to military sites, but to civilian infrastructure, energy facilities, transport networks and other critical public services. And when infrastructure is hit, it's not just buildings that collapse, it's systems that sustain everyday life, electricity, clean water, healthcare. Because modern warfare doesn't just destroy targets, it disrupts entire societies deliberately. Sanctions compound the damage, limiting access to the outside world and the things it can provide, like medicine, imported foodstuffs, and access to international markets, driving up inflation and placing enormous pressure on ordinary citizens. In Iran, years of economic restrictions, combined with the current sustained military tensions, have created a situation where civilians are squeezed from every angle. And this raises a difficult, uncomfortable question. When powerful nations engage in conflict, who really pays the price? Because history suggests it's rarely the decision makers, it's the people. From the overthrow of the Iranian Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh in 1953 to the Iraq War and the removal of Saddam Hussein, to the long war in Afghanistan and the resulting rule of the Taliban, US intervention has frequently left behind a trail of instability and civilian suffering. Critics argue Iran is now once again the latest chapter in that story. Tonight we're asking not what this war means strategically, but what it means for the people of Iran day to day. Is the current conflict just another example of geopolitical power games being played at the expense of ordinary lives? Joining me tonight, Iranian affairs analyst and journalist Fereshteh Sadeghi. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's get into it. We hear a lot about precision strikes and strategic targets, but it's very clear that this isn't the reality. The conflict started with the wiping out of an entire girls' school, of course, but I don't think we get the full picture day by day on the ground in Iran. What's the real impact on civilians? Are we underestimating the scale of human suffering, do you think?
Actually, considering the fact that Iran has been dehumanized and demonized for years and years and years by Western media, yes, I think the Western media have underestimated the effects of this war and the impact on people, on families, on civilians, on infrastructure, and whatever that is related to civilians in Iran. And unfortunately, we have seen ferocious attacks, Israeli strikes, alongside American bombardments of Iranian civilian infrastructure, without any doubt. So I think one of the things, or one of the matters that after this war, or even during this war, which the war, by the way, has not finished yet, is that the Western media and even the regional media, you in Pakistan, whoever, should pay attention more to this aspect of this war.
There's been increasing reports of damage to critical infrastructure, energy grids, transport systems, public utilities. So I think we have to ask to what extent these are very deliberate attacks on civilian life. Is destroying civilian systems and inciting unrest or desperation part of the strategy now, as much as they deny it?
Actually, it is definitely deliberately done. And there is no doubt about it, especially on the side of the Israelis. Let me tell you, apart from, for example, power grids, or for example, bridges, that they are on civilian roads. Actually, we don't have any military roads; they are all civilian roads. We even had universities in Tehran and the other cities, but mainly in Tehran, also in Isfahan, industrial universities. One of them was Shahid Beheshti University, the other one was the Sharif Technology University, the other one was Science and Technology University in Tehran, the other one was Isfahan Industrial Universities. And it seems that what the American and Zionist aggressor, because there is no doubt, there is no difference between them, tried to do was they try to prevent Iran from making advances in science and technology, and by directly attacking these scientific centers. For example, there was an organization for science and aerospace. It was totally civilian aerospace program. It was obliterated. So you can see that they have been trying to attack Iranian infrastructure, civilian infrastructure, and the ones that they have and their impact on people's life too. So part of it can be for making people desperate or forcing them to go to the streets and protest against the Islamic Republic. They want their goal, which was the toppling of the Islamic Republic, and they failed to gain it through people, which is almost impossible to happen.
So beyond the bombs and missiles, of course, there are other layers to this conflict. The economic one, for a start, the strangling of an economy with sanctions. They're often framed as non-violent tools by other governments, but in reality, they starve a population of choice and fair prices. They restrict access to all sorts of critical imported goods. They drive up inflation, hugely impacting everyday life for ordinary Iranians. So are sanctions really economic warfare on civilians rather than just a punishment for a non-compliant government?
You know, sanctions are definitely a sort of punishment tool by the United States. And actually, we can say their Western allies, Europeans specifically, to punish the Islamic Republic, but at the same time to punish the people. Because when you look at the sanctions, for example, the effects of sanctions on Forex market, I think it was the Treasury Secretary of the United States. He openly and directly, without any shame, said that we played with Iranian currency and we devaluated the rial. So, you know, when rial or when your national currency is devaluated, people feel bad about it, especially when they see that the inflation goes up at the same rate with this exchange rate between the Iranian rial. And the interesting thing is that during the 40-day war, this national currency exchange rate between the Iranian rial and the US dollar didn't change at all. The moment that war, it went into a ceasefire phase, again, the rate started to rise, which shows that the Americans again returned to their normal method, which is sanctioning and playing with the Iranian rial. And the point is that they are addicted. I remember one of the former foreign ministers of Iran once said, Americans are addicted to sanctions, and they really are. And when it comes to for example, energy prices haven't changed in Iran at all over the past 40 days or so, unlike the United States or maybe in Pakistan. I'm not sure about it. But in Iran, energy prices are still stable. They haven't changed at all. At gas stations, there is no change. But sanctions mostly prevent the transfer of technology to Iran. You can say any sort of technology, that has with daily life of the people. It has something with the daily life of the people. Also, it has impacts on, for example, you can say medicine treatment, medical supplies that they have to reach Iran, and Iranians now they have difficulty to find them, for example, for cancer treatment. These are the unseen aspects of sanctions. And when Americans speak of sanctions, they say that, oh, our sanctions are smart. They just target the Iranian, for example, government or the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. But I think the Iranian government and the IRGC are the least impacted by the sanctions. And the main goal of sanctions, again, are the Iranian people.
The United States and Israel maintain that their actions are defensive, aimed at neutralising regional threats. But many critics argue this is part of a broader strategy of regional dominance at any cost. So is it a necessary security response, or is it disproportionate aggression with huge civilian consequences that seem to go largely unmentioned?
Let me tell you something. Since 1979, when the Islamic Revolution happened in Iran and an Islamic Republic took power in Iran, the Americans have been sabotaging, have been plotting against Iran. So in the first years of after the 1979, in 1980s, they used to say that Iran was trying to export a revolutionary ideology to the world, but it didn't happen. And then they encouraged Saddam Hussein, the former Iraqi dictator, to attack Iran with full backing of the United States, of the Western world, of then the USSR. And then again, they failed. 8 years, people and the Iranian people fought against the entire world. And we didn't have any friend except then Syrian President Hafez Assad. Maybe Libya's leader, Muammar Gaddafi, he helped Iran with its missile program, because nobody sold Iran any missiles. Nobody sold Iran any, you can say, military equipment to defend itself. So when the war finished and Iran went to the reconstruction phase, they raised the nuclear issue. It is about 30 years or more that Benjamin Netanyahu every week comes and says Iran is 2 weeks away, 2 months away from making a nuclear bomb. And he has tried to sell this, and I think maybe your audiences have seen former Foreign Secretary John Kerry. He was saying that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu came to all American, recent presidents, and he tried to convince them to attack Iran, and nobody accepted it except Trump. So when you come to all this, when you all look at this picture in a big picture, you see that there is no matter of security. Iran has not been threatening a country, neither its 15 neighbors, nor European countries, nor Americans, nobody. And then they try, their problem is with an entity called Islamic Republic, which doesn't surrender to the United States and to the hegemony of the Israelis in this region. And it was the last card that they played with, which was a military aggression. And again, they failed. And now they have returned to their normal addiction, which is blockade and sanctions.
You mentioned Iraq there, so let's draw a comparison. After the Iraq War, we saw infrastructure collapse, a generation ripped apart by civilian casualties on a massive scale, and long-term political security and economic instability. So I have to ask, are we now witnessing the early stages of a similar trajectory in Iran, do you think?
No. The Islamic Republic in its whole is standing firmly. People are supporting, I think, the popularity. I don't have any sort of survey, but what I see from the eyes of an observer, when I see what I see on the streets, especially in Tehran, which is usually, the people in Tehran are usually somehow opposition to the Islamic Republic. What I see is that the Islamic Republic has firm support from public support. The attacks on civilian infrastructure hasn't been able to paralyze the daily life, because Iran is a very big country. When you look at Iran as a country, how big it is, then you see that it's not easy to topple the Islamic Republic, neither easy to to capture this country or to paralyze it easily. So whatever you see, this is media hype, propaganda, especially on the side of the Western countries and mainly the United States and Israelis, which have failed to gain their goal, which was the toppling of this country and this integration and provoking a civil war. Fortunately, Iranian people from whatever ethnicities they are, whatever their religion or sect they are standing together, and again, they will fail in their plots.
The impact of the war is wide-reaching across generations. It shapes the lives of the children who grow up in it as much as the adults who try to make sure they all survive it. As I mentioned earlier, the war started with an attack on the girls' school in Minab, with it being struck by the initial US-Israeli airstrikes. And equally in Gaza, we've repeatedly seen airstrikes that hit schools, hospitals and other civilian infrastructure. So when very obviously non-military targets are repeatedly being targeted, surely it can't just be filed under unfortunate collateral damage. Surely it points to a pattern in both the US and Israel's approach to warfare.
Actually, when the war started, yes, with the attack on Minab. And let me tell you that the school was not just a girls' school, it was boys' school, and there was a daycare next adjacent to the school, and all of them have been killed. And you may not know that the number of the boys students who were killed was way more than girls.
I did not know that, no.
Unfortunately, nobody paid attention. Nobody paid attention to that fact. I think there were more than 70 boys, between the age of 6 or 7 to 11, 12. They were all were killed. Even one of them, on the social media, his name was Makan, and only one of his shoes, and only one shoes, not the pair. Only one shoes of him has been found. He's been totally shattered. His family can't find even a piece of him, their son. So when you look at it, you see that the Americans, up to now, during the 40 days of war, more than 250 children were killed. About 120 of them, between 120 to 150 of them were in Minab, but the rest were in other parts of the country. Schools were attacked. In the vicinity of the schools were attacked. And for example, one of the infrastructure was, for example, a very famous school in Tehran. It was next to the police station. And it was damaged. It was a school for genius, highest intelligent students. It was totally obliterated. So you see the pattern is that while they were trying to kill the higher echelon of the government, at the same time they are trying to kill the students or the ones who form the future, who make the future of the country. An engineer, electronics engineer, he was assassinated in his home alongside his son, who was supposed to have a very shining future because he had very high IQ, and his daughter, who was unfortunately mentally and physically handicapped. And the father, his son, and his daughter, they were all killed together. So you see, this pattern is not something that just targets, for example, nuclear scientists, exactly the nuclear scientists, exactly the military commander. It targets alongside civilian people. And I personally think that the goal of this kind of attacking civilians is to create fear among them, to make them stay away from not supporting the scientists, the university lecturer, the commanders. But again, as I said before, they failed in all their attempts.
And expanding on this theme, targeting civilian infrastructure, the use of collective punishment to create suffering through sanctions, these raise serious legal and ethical questions. So are international norms being quietly eroded as the world looks on?
I don't say international norms have been eroded. I say there is a double standard. When it comes to countries like Iran, when it is in Lebanon, even now that the war apparently has stopped, missile strikes and bombardment of Iranian cities, have been stopped for some time, for 3 weeks, almost 3 weeks. The war continues in Lebanon. And in Lebanon, they are the civilians who have been constantly killed. So when it comes to Iran, to Lebanon, to Gaza, to Yemen, I remember when Saudi Arabia was striking Yemeni children, Yemeni infrastructure, Yemeni people, Yemeni children, then nobody talks about this. In Iraq, you remember Madeleine Albright, former foreign secretary, she said that 500,000 children were killed during the years of sanctions, U.S. sanctions on Iraq. And when the anchor or representative or somebody asked her, was it worth it? She said, yeah, it's worth it. So 500,000 children were killed in Iraq. The same thing happened in Iran, in Gaza. So they call it collateral damage, but actually they impose a double standard, and it is because of years and years of dehumanization of Arabs, Muslims, Iranians, and giving value just to Western lives, to whoever is blonde, to whoever has blue eyes, but as if the other people are not human at all. So I don't say that international norms have been eroded. No, the international norms are in place, but just for Western countries.
So if less attention is being given to civilian suffering, particularly on different continents, to a people who don't always look like you in the West, is the way the war is being reported globally a factor in governments getting away with less than gentlemanly warfare?
I personally think that little by little, people of the world, and maybe that's thanks to the extension of social media, though the social media still are under the control of the Americans and Israelis, people in the world are waking up. So apart from the social media, apart from the Western media that they are propagating their own goals and their own agenda, people now can see, through social media, can contact, can see more pictures, can see the realities on the ground that are told to them. And little by little, they are forcing, or maybe they are pressuring their own governments to do something. And when the new generation of maybe Western politicians come to power, then you see that there are some shifts in their policies. For example, I think in Hungary last week or 10 days ago, a new leader, a new prime minister has been chosen, has been elected, that he said if Prime Minister Netanyahu flies our airspace or wants to come to Hungary, we will arrest him and give him to the International Criminal Court. So people of the world are waking up, maybe gradually. I have to admit that it is a gradual process. It doesn't happen during, for example, 2 months or during a war that the United States has imposed on Iran. Also regional people. I know that, for example, in Pakistan, people all around, in all the spectrums of Pakistani society, they were supporting Iran. Also in other countries, in Arab countries. So we see that maybe little by little, hopefully, gradually, people will wake up and they see that the realities on the ground and what the Western media and Western politicians and pathological liars such as Trump or the German Chancellor Merz, they were telling their people they are total lies. And in future, maybe in 5 or 10 years from now, many things will change, hopefully.
So in all of this, where are the Iranian people when they don't always have access to the internet or a way to tell their own story without risk of serious repercussions? Are they being represented in global discourse or reduced to statistics in a geopolitical struggle?
I guess Iranian people have not been able to represent themselves to the Western world, to the international global media, because of that dehumanization process that has gone for such a long time. Iran has been under sanctions for 47 years. Even now, due to security concerns, there are some restrictions on internet in Iran. Internally, there is a domestic internet that works very well. There are some domestic messaging apps that people use. but their access to international media and maybe I can say global social media has been restricted. I can't deny it. But even then, in the years that before this war, for example, whenever Western media came to Iran, they just portray a group of Iranian people, the westernized ones. And even after this war, by the end of this war, I saw it was on Reuters. Let me tell you an example. I saw a report from the Reuters. It had gone to a very, Reuters news agency, it had gone to a very posh area of Tehran, to a very famous club. And people were walking, they were doing sport, they were working up, women with their sport. And then women without hijab, non-hijabis. And they were speaking about their experience about the war, while I personally know that they are the ones who left Tehran on the first day of the American-Israeli strikes. And they left Tehran for their villas and for their suburban big houses that they have outside of Tehran. So not even for a minute they were under the bombardment, and they were speaking about the experience of bombardment while they were not in the city. The Iranian people, so Reuters doesn't go to Minab, doesn't talk to families of the Minabi people, the families of these children, the girls and the boys, and even those small children who were in the daycare at the time of the explosions. It doesn't talk to them. So again, even after this war, you see that the representation, again, it is misguided. It is, I can say, it is distorted. So what people are like me are trying to do is that we are trying to show a picture. So that's why maybe on Western media, even maybe in Pakistan, you may not know that it's more than 60 nights, maybe 63 or 64 nights, and every single night, people go to the streets, they wave flags, they express their support for the leader, for the Ayatollah Sayyid Mujtaba Khamenei, for the Iranian government, for the Iranian armed forces, for the IRGC, for the Iranian military, regular military. They express their support for them. But you don't see them. You don't see them on Western media to see, oh, look at them. Every night, millions of Iranians, 64 nights. It's not easy to say every night people go out and they express support, they express solidarity. So even now, after all these years, after all this war, after all these people who have been killed, again, you see the misrepresentation of the Iranian people. And I think it is up to the people, up to the, I can say, real journalists to come to Iran and to see and to portray the realities of the ground.
So real journalists to talk to real people is basically what you're saying. I think that's a relevant point. Fereshta Sadeghi, fantastic to have you with us today. Really interesting conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. War is often explained in terms of strategy, security and necessity, but for those living through it, that's a far cry from the reality, it seems. If civilian infrastructure no longer functions, if clean water no longer flows, if hospitals can no longer function, it has an impact way beyond government strategy, and long after the fighting has finished, lives that are never quite the same again. From Iraq to Afghanistan and now back to Iran again, the pattern is difficult to ignore, because while wars may be fought in the name of security, their consequences are more accurately measured in civilian suffering. So perhaps the real question isn't just whether these wars are justified, but whether the human cost is ever truly accounted for. You've been watching One Voice here on Asia One. I'm Kerry Alexandra. Thank you for joining us.